Alright, so I've started it. So we will see if my handsome mug decides to show up, and if it doesn't, yeah, yeah, yeah. So, yep, there I am. All right. Hey everyone. So sorry that it's taken us a little while to get to here. We've had some slight technical difficulties, but it's all good now. So I suppose I should preface this talk by introducing myself. My name's Chris Burden. I'm a alumni of the AIE in Canberra. I started studying in 2016, and I've now kind of graduated to working in a indie dev studio full time, just over in Game Plus. Our studio name, of course, is Aberrant Realities, and we basically do a lot of VR and AR work. So I suppose the first thing, or the other first thing, I've already talked about the first thing, but the other thing I should talk about is um, what my role within the company has been, what my role within the team has been. And my role originally was, and still is, a game designer. Um, and while we were studying at AIE, we all kind of got together and we realized that we really enjoyed working with each other and all that. And we've done a little bit of audio stuff. AIE is really good about kind of encouraging students to explore things that interest them and entertain them. And ever since an early age, I had always loved games. But one thing that I noticed that I always loved that a lot of people were kind of what does this mean? Was audio. Because to a lot of people, audio is something that when it's there, everything's fine, everything's great. But when it's not there, you can really tell. And one of the first things that I put my hand up for was to basically learn some basic workflow for audio. So in addition to what AIE taught me, I'm also self-taught, and I'm a absolute steadfast believer that just about anyone can pick up audio design. Like you don't have to be, like a musical savant or anything like that. It's basically just about listening to sounds and understanding some fundamentals of how sound works. So like, what's something going to sound like if it gets hit with this? What's something going to sound like if it is in, a cave and all that kind of thing, which you can basically, it's mostly just common sense. So I guess initially what I am going to show you guys is actually super exclusive, a short snippet of a part of our gameplay that I've been kind of working on the sound for, and that particular part is actually one of the guns in our game. And so basically, what would normally happen is one of the artists would send me an animation or something like that, and I would take a look at it and I would kind of look at how it moved, how it walked, how it talked, and I'd be able to then go from there to creating something that hopefully sounded really good. Luckily for me, and in this case, I was able to essentially jump into VR and be able to play around with this weapon and pull the trigger on it a few times and basically see how it worked because it was all textured, animated, everything. Having a frame of reference when you're making sound is probably one of the most important things because you can kind of see all the moving parts and all the nitty gritty that will actually enable you to kind of predict what sound is going to happen when and how. Sorry about that. My throat gets really dry really fast. So this is what I've basically been working with, and it's a black screen. Oh, there we go. So hang on, I'll just try playing that. Yep, there we go. So that's what I've been working with at the moment. I basically, hang on, I'll replay that for you because it went a little bit glitchy for some reason. So this is basically one of the weapons in our game, and because it's all, like I said before, fully textured, fully animated, I'm able to essentially just have a look at it. So the first thing I kind of notice when I look at this is it's a handgun. I know what type of particular handgun it is. I know how that handgun sounds in real life. And if I'm being honest with you, guns sound pretty boring in real life. When you're a sound designer or an artist or what have you, you tend to watch a lot of YouTube videos of things just to see how they work. So in real life, this gun sounds really flat, sounds really, but when you look at games, you'll notice like in a lot of aspects of games, everything's super dramatic, super over the top, and especially I think sound effects are a huge indicator of that. So when I'm looking at this thing, I see a few things. I see the trigger being pulled, the hammer sliding back, or the top part sliding back. I'm seeing basically every moving part of this gun, and then I'm trying to design my sound around that. So in this case, I've actually kind of got something I prepared earlier, and with that, I have base. So first off, the program that I generally use to do all of our sound is Audacity. I know a lot of people use Fmod because it has integration with Unity. I know a lot of people use Reaper. I'm a firm believer that you don't need the fanciest thing in the world to make pretty okay sounding stuff. So I guess, what's the word I would use? My philosophy has always been use what you know. You don't have to be a technical whiz to kind of understand Audacity. And the really cool thing about Audacity is if we just jump up here to the effect panel, whole bunch of really cool things that you can do to your sounds. So a bit like a cake, I've actually got one that I prepared earlier. So I'll just drag this over here so you guys can see. So essentially what I do when I do my sounds is I layer them. And the first sound that I've actually got here is my bass. So when I looked at the gun, first thing you think is gunshot. And in this case, I've essentially got my bass here, so I'm just going to drag this in here, and it's going to ask me, well, first off, it's going to freeze on me because that's fun. First off, it's going to ask me if I want to make a copy of the files. Highly recommend doing this because computers, as we've learned today, are fickle things. So this is a sound that I worked on earlier. So basically, I've got a huge audio library that I've built up. Audio libraries are generally pretty easy to build up. If you go online, you'll be able to find lots of Creative Commons sounds. So Creative Commons meaning that you can use them either with attribution or without attribution. If you're just working on personal projects and stuff, that stuff's generally fine. So a few really good ones that I'd love to give a shout out to because they're just amazing. So like Zapsplat Audio, Kenny, stuff like that are super helpful places to get the start of your collection going. And the other thing as well is recording your own sounds. So I've got like a $100 microphone with a wind blocker on it, and it does an absolutely phenomenal job. You can just as easily use your phone to get some really cool sounds. I think that when you're just starting out or for all this stuff, buying the top of the range equipment straight up, not necessary. So I'll just let you guys hear this sound. So that is essentially what I would consider to be the lowest sound that I'm going to have in there, and that's what I'm going to build my bass off. So I believe this is a completely different gun. So I've got like a whole library of all of them, and I basically go through, I chop them up, change them, listen to what sounds cool, and then I kind of think about where I'm going to go from there. So the next place that I went from there was I enjoyed that sound, but I really wanted something that was a little bit lower. So I'll just solo this so we can listen to each one. And I really wanted that kind of metallic click, that really hard kind of dense background sound that you would get if you fired a gun. And then the third one I did was I actually took a sound and I just bass boosted it because everyone loves bass boosting. So when I drag that in and I untick that solo and I solo that, so that's like the first part of what I would consider the meat of a sound comes from. And I'll talk a little bit. I think I talked a little bit about meat before. I'll talk a little bit more about meat when I get down to layer 6. So that was a nice amount of bass. I wanted a little bit more, but I wanted it to sound a little different. So once again, solo this and we'll be able to. So the difference between the two, that one's a lot more bass. This one is kind of that sweet spot in between layer 2 and layer 3, where it's just going to add a little bit more to that sound. And the next one that we're going to be adding is, sorry, I'm just going to flick back and forth between these. I'm going to go back to our pistol reference, and it's going to freak out at me a bunch. That's fine. So, yeah, I was noticing that it was sliding back and forth a little bit. Like, that's kind of what guns do. But it is a sound that I definitely want to include in there because in terms of visual feedback, you also want to provide that audio feedback, so there's not as much suspension of disbelief there. So, yeah, the next thing I'm adding is my hammer slide click. That's what I called it because, if I'm being honest with you, I don't know all the parts of guns and I don't really care to. And that's just a neat little sound that I found. I'm pretty sure this was basically just a gun dry cocking, and I thought that would sound really nice in there. And finally, we're going to get down to layer 6, which is my favorite layer, and that is the meat. So, when people talk about the meat of a gun, they're generally referring to the first impact, the first low frequency hard sound that you hear in a game. So when you think about a game like Doom, you think about the shotgun, you think about how much of a punch it packs when it shoots, because it's obviously a very strong gun, so you want that underlying sound effect to reinforce that. The whole point of sound effects in games is to reinforce something. So if you think about Mario jumping up and picking up a coin, that's there to reinforce the fact that you've picked up a coin. It actually gives us a little bit of a buzz when we hear that sound because we begin to associate it in almost like a Pavlovian state with reward. And we want to be constantly rewarded as players. So I think adding something like meat to a sound, and I'll show you what I mean by meat. It's that initial, just that punch. And then on top of that, I'm going to be throwing, so basically once hang on, I'm just going to mute this. I'm going to solo this, and I'm going to listen to how my sound is progressing so far. Like, it's sounding pretty good, but I think that there's a little bit more that I want to add to it. Obviously, a gun wouldn't sound that flat normally, so I want to add things like reverb, some reverb/echo, and I basically just want to give the player a little bit more feedback when they listen to this sound. So the next one I'm going to add is the reverb and the aftershock. And without further ado, when I hit play, it's going to sound pretty damn cool. Really glad I was able to replicate that. Sometimes when you're making sounds, it kind of gets to a point where you don't remember the black magic that you had to perform in order to actually get it to work. But in this case, I've been right as rain. So I suppose I've actually cheated a little bit. And what I've done is I've actually already got this sound in game. So it's essentially in Unity, and I believe it's attached to an animation. So when the animation plays, the gun shoots. Or the other way to do it is to essentially, every time the player pulls a trigger, the sound plays. So what I will do is I'll throw up this video and we'll be able to hear what the gun sounds like in game when it's got like the 3D sound effects and everything on it. So once you start adding things like gun impact sound or like bullet impact sounds and all that kind of thing, it really starts to come to life a lot more. And for me, sound has always been about taking something awesome that someone else has made and improving it just a whole bunch. And I feel like that's probably what we've done here today. I feel like we've actually made something that is just really, really cool. So I'm genuinely happy with that. I suppose my advice to people who are wanting to start out with audio is to essentially just look around you and find inspiration. So one thing I've always kind of done is if I see something cool on the internet, so like for example, I saw a picture of this like crazy big arena, and there was like a gladiator like standing over another dude. And I was like, I want to make a soundscape for that. And I think finding just random things that you can make soundscapes for is what's actually going to help teach you a little bit. It's going to be super fun. It's something cool that you can show off. It's generally all portfolio worthy. People love sound, and that's kind of something that I've discovered. Even if they don't really notice it, they really appreciate the effort that's being put into it. So once again, just like the program I'm using is literally Audacity, which is completely free. I'm pretty sure it's open source. It's got a whole bunch of cool little nifty things that it does. I know of several pretty prominent podcasts and games that have used Audacity. Some alternatives to Audacity are things like Fmod, things like Reaper. Audacity is what I learned on, so that's what I'm most comfortable with. And in terms of like collecting sound banks and stuff, so things like the Sonos GDC packages, which are completely free, are absolutely awesome. Um, and things like Kini, Kini.nl, who actually provides um, Unity assets and sound assets and everything like that that you can basically donate for. And he includes some really good stuff in there. Sorry, I should say they include some really good stuff in there. And as well as that, just even places like Freesound and Zapsplat and all that. Basically, wherever you can get your sounds from, you're already well on your way towards working towards that. And I think sound design is probably one of the most appreciated disciplines in AIE and in game dev because it's such a vital part of game development that sometimes people aren't even always aware of. It's like they just kind of see a game and they think about how cool the game looks, how well it works, how well it plays, and sound is always kind of there in the back of their mind. But it's never really something that they think about, well, hey, this is something that I could do. So I guess like my biggest piece of advice is if you're coming to AIE and you're super keen to get started and all that, that's amazing. Also, don't forget to kind of look laterally at not only what is being offered, but also the things in addition that you can get out of it. So things like like audio, like working in VR, working in film, all that. Like AIE is essentially a really great place to do all that stuff, and I'm like definitely super happy to be here. I think that there's plenty and plenty of opportunities. In terms of audio design, there's some really, really, really good talks on YouTube. If you basically just put in audio design for some like GDC talks, I believe Extra Credits have done some. There's a whole bunch of resources. So the really cool thing about the age we live in and about Unity and stuff like that is basically if you have a question about something, someone out there's going to already A, have asked it, and B, someone is generally going to probably have answered it. Look, I think that's probably going to do it for me. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've thoroughly enjoyed live streaming. And potentially, hopefully, look forward to seeing you all studying here at AIE. So thank you very much.